By what time were the Neanderthals gone? And what do we know about, you mentioned briefly that we inherited some particular genes that probably had adaptive value that helped
Hmm.
modern humans that came from the Neanderthals. What kinds of genes were we getting from them?
Well, I'll take the second part first because it turns out here's a good example, right? In this week's news, additional work on Neanderthal, genes that modern humans carry shows that there's at least one gene that confers slightly higher COVID risk,
Hmm.
and one gene that confers about 30% COVID protection
Hmm.
that we got from Neanderthals. And this is a great story in the sense that the message of human genetics of the last certainly 5 years and probably 10 years is that we used to talk about finding the genes for traits,
Mhm.
right? You're going to find the gene for bald headedness or find the gene for, I don't know, having 6 fingers or something. There are in some cases genes that do those things, right? There is a gene for lactase, and that gene, by virtue of mutations that affect its expression, has a direct effect on whether you're a milk drinker or not, as a when you're not a kid, when you're grown up. So there are cases where it is a gene, and it's one gene makes a lot of difference. But for the most part, it's lots of genes.
Mm-hmm.
And in the case of most phenotypes that we measure, hundreds of genes. And so when we look at, okay, we've got these genes from ancient people, what do they do? It's almost always the case that it's a mixed bag. If we look at one phenotype, they might do one thing, one gene might work in one way and another gene might work in the other way. And
Mm-hmm.
you've got them both from this ancient population, right?
Mm-hmm.
Broadly, there are some categories of genes that are overrepresented in what we got from Neanderthals, and other categories that are underrepresented. And so aside from particular things, where we could say, hey, people who carry this gene have a 30% higher risk of or lower risk of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Aside from that, we can say that overrepresented are genes involving immunity. And in particular, genes involving innate immunity. And some of these seem to be antiviral or viral defense sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
HLA, we have HLA variants, human leukocyte antigen, which is a major, it's a self-recognition that your cells have, and it's really important to immunity. And we have HLA variants from Neanderthals. We have some is enriched in what we got from Neanderthals is stuff involving skin and hair, although it's not clear what it's doing to our skin and hair.
Mm-hmm.
It's not pigmentation stuff.
Okay.
We do have a couple of pigmentation things that are lighter pigment things from Neanderthals, but not a lot. Most of the lighter pigment things that are hanging around today in populations are young genes that have only been, or young mutations that have only been around for a few tens of thousands of years. Yeah, so underrepresented. Underrepresented are things involving sperm. And the X chromosome, we have a real deficit of Neanderthal genetic input into our population from the X chromosome. And looking at that, a lot of scientists, suspect that, well, maybe there's something going on with the sort of hybrids, that maybe there is a little bit of selection against hybridization with Neanderthals, and it's manifested in this sort of, in gene deserts in the X chromosome and that kind of thing. So we're still working to understand, right? But the problem from the point of view of an anthropologist, I have to say one of the cool things is that the problem of understanding Neanderthal genetics is not a problem getting Neanderthal genetics. We can look today at Neanderthal genes in the UK Biobank, where we have thousands of British people that have the Neanderthal version of some genes.
Wow.
And you can look at this to see what they do. Turns out that they make your head a little longer. It's one of the things that if people who carry lots of Neanderthal genes, they seem to have a little bit longer heads.